The trade in illegal drugs has always been about more than violence and addiction. It is also about money, enormous sums that fund private jets, luxury real estate, and spheres of influence shielding crime from view. Sometimes that money elevates traffickers into circles where business deals and politics blur, where fortunes are made and reputations are bought. Welcome to the Fraud Files. Today we will talk about 10 of the most powerful billionaires whose wealth was connected to the drug trade. Men and women who built vast empires in the shadows and eventually were exposed. Stay with us until the end, because this video will reveal how legal power, international finance, and secrecy can protect the people the world most wants to catch. Number 10. Carlos Lader. Carlos Lader was one of the masterminds who helped transform cocaine from a niche product into a billion-dollar export. Born in Armenia, Colombia in 1949 to a German father and Colombian mother, Lader grew up fascinated by power, politics, and airplanes. Those obsessions would later collide in a way that reshaped the drug trade. In the late 1970s, Lader turned a quiet Bahamian island called Norman's Cay into one of the most critical hubs for cocaine smuggling in the world. From this tropical paradise, his private fleet of planes made endless runs to Florida, dropping off tons of cocaine that flooded the U.S. market. He combined geography, aviation, and logistics with an unusual level of organization for the time, even setting up his own private army to secure the island. Lader bought luxury cars, held extravagant parties, and even dabbled in politics, promoting far-right ideologies and praising Adolf Hitler. But beneath the flash and bravado was a meticulous strategist. His operation ran like a multinational corporation, complete with shell companies, offshore accounts, and political connections that stretched from Colombia to the Caribbean. For years, Lader's control of Norman's Cay gave the Medellin cartel a crucial supply line into America. His empire showed how a single man could merge aviation technology, corruption, and greed into a global business model for the cocaine trade. But by the early 1980s, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration was closing in. After being captured in Colombia and extradited to the United States, Lader was sentenced to life in prison, later reduced in exchange for testimony against Manuel Noriega. Number 9. Griselda Blanco. Before the world knew Pablo Escobar, there was Griselda Blanco, the woman who ruled the cocaine trade with fear, intelligence, and bloodshed. Born in Cartagena, Colombia in 1943 and raised in the slums of Medellin, Blanco's life was marked by violence and poverty from the very beginning. By her teenage years, she was already involved in crime, kidnapping, pickpocketing, and running scams to survive. When she moved to New York City in the 1970s, Blanco saw opportunity where others saw chaos. She helped pioneer large-scale cocaine trafficking into the United States, setting up smuggling routes hidden in clothing, appliances, and even false-bottomed luggage. When authorities cracked down, she fled to Miami, and that's where her empire exploded. Known as La Madrina, or the Godmother, Blanco built a multi-million-dollar network that controlled much of the cocaine entering Miami during the city's wildest era. Her operation mixed business acumen with extreme brutality. Rivals were eliminated without hesitation, and she even earned a reputation for ordering hits personally, including the infamous motorcycle assassinations that became her signature. Blanco's wealth was staggering. She owned mansions, racehorses, and fleets of luxury cars. She was said to throw lavish parties attended by celebrities and politicians, while also living in constant paranoia, surrounded by armed guards. But her ruthlessness wasn't reserved for outsiders. Her own family got caught in the violence too. Her sons were pulled into the business, and several met tragic ends. Despite her power, Blanco's empire eventually collapsed under the weight of law enforcement pressure. She was arrested in California in 1985, convicted of drug trafficking, and sentenced to nearly 2 decades in prison. After serving her time, she was deported back to Colombia, where in 2012 she was assassinated outside a butcher shop in Medellin, reportedly in the same motorcycle style she had once made infamous. Her story remains one of the most chilling examples of ambition without limits, and how it always comes with a cost. Number 8. Amado Carrillo Fuentes. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, known infamously as the Lord of the Skies, was not just another cartel leader. He was a businessman of the underworld, a man who turned airspace into a global cocaine superhighway. During the 1980s and 1990s, Carrillo built one of the most sophisticated smuggling empires in history, using an entire fleet of private jets to move tons of cocaine from Colombia through Mexico and into the United States. What made him stand out wasn't only his ability to move drugs, but how efficiently he did it, running his operations like a multinational corporation. He poured billions into real estate, construction firms, and hotels, laundering his profits so seamlessly that much of his fortune blended into Mexico's legitimate economy. Behind that polished image was a man who understood that money could buy silence, loyalty, and safety. Law enforcement agents would later describe him as untouchable, a figure who preferred negotiation to violence but wasn't afraid to use force when it suited his goals. In 1997, Carrillo's story took a strange and almost cinematic turn when he reportedly died during cosmetic surgery, an attempt to change his appearance and evade capture. Rumors swirled for years that he might have faked his death, feeding into the legend of a man whose empire was so vast that even death couldn't confirm his end. Number 7. Khun Sa. Deep in the jungles of Myanmar, back when it was still called Burma, Khun Sa built an empire that would dominate the world's heroin trade for decades. Known as the King of the Golden Triangle, he turned a remote mountainous region into the global center of opium production during the 1970s and 1980s. His armies, made up of thousands of fighters from the Shan ethnic group, guarded entire valleys filled with poppy fields, while his convoys transported heroin through Thailand and Laos, feeding the addiction crisis that gripped much of the West. Khun Sa's genius wasn't only in controlling supply, but in turning drug profits into influence. He negotiated directly with governments, offering truces or political favors in exchange for protection. He built schools, hospitals, and roads, not out of charity, but as a way to solidify control and appear as a kind of Robin Hood to local communities. His empire functioned like a state within a state, with its own army, taxation, and diplomatic channels. By the 1990s, Khun Sa's reach had made him untouchable within his territory, yet global pressure eventually cornered him. Instead of facing a violent downfall, he surrendered to the Myanmar government in a secret deal that allowed him to live out his final years comfortably in Yangon, reportedly managing businesses and real estate while remaining shielded from prosecution. When he died in 2007, he left behind a legacy that blurred the line between warlord, drug lord, and political player. Number 6. Pablo Escobar. Pablo Escobar remains the most recognizable figure in the history of global drug trafficking, a man who turned cocaine into a multi-billion-dollar business and reshaped Colombia's economy, politics, and international reputation in the process. He started small, smuggling electronics and stolen cars, but soon realized that the white powder moving through the Andes could make him richer than most governments. By the 1980s, his Medellin cartel controlled the majority of the world's cocaine trade, and Escobar himself was earning hundreds of millions of dollars every week. But Escobar wasn't only a trafficker. He crafted a public image that blurred the line between criminal and folk hero. He built entire neighborhoods for the poor, funded schools, sponsored football clubs, and handed out cash to families who had nothing. In Medellin, some called him Don Pablo, a man of the people. At the same time, his operations fueled an era of unprecedented violence, assassinations, and bombings that left thousands dead. His wealth gave him the power to buy politicians, manipulate law enforcement, and even win a seat in Colombia's Congress. When the Colombian government, backed by U.S. forces, finally turned against him, Escobar responded with terror, ordering attacks on police, judges, and journalists. In the end, after years of war between the state and his private army, Escobar was tracked down and killed in 1993. His death marked the end of an era, but his story remains the ultimate paradox. A man who built schools with one hand and destroyed cities with the other, proving that wealth gained through violence can build a legacy, but never peace. Number 5. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's journey from a poor boy in Sinaloa, Mexico, to one of the richest and most dangerous men in the world is a story of ambition, fearlessness, and extraordinary cunning. Born into poverty, Guzman began as a low-level trafficker under the guidance of older cartel leaders. But by the 1990s, he had learned how to turn smuggling into a science, using hidden tunnels under the US-Mexico border, camouflaged submarines, and fleets of private jets to move billions of dollars worth of narcotics across continents. Under his leadership, the Sinaloa cartel became the most powerful drug organization on earth, managing not only the flow of cocaine but also methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl. Guzman's wealth allowed him to buy protection at every level, from local police to high-ranking politicians. He lived in sprawling ranches, traveled with armed convoys, and became notorious for his ability to vanish when authorities closed in. Twice, he escaped from maximum security prisons, once through a laundry cart, and later through a mile-long tunnel that led straight to his shower floor. But even power has limits. After years of pursuit, El Chapo was captured again in 2016 and extradited to the United States, where his trial revealed the staggering scope of his empire. Testimonies exposed billion-dollar bribes, offshore accounts, and a global network that blurred the line between organized crime and business. Number 4. Zhenli Yigan. A Chinese-Mexican businessman with legitimate enterprises in pharmaceuticals, Yigan built his fortune importing pseudoephedrine, a common ingredient in cold medicine, but also a critical component in the production of methamphetamine. By blending legal trade with illicit supply chains, he created a business model that linked Asia's chemical markets with Mexico's drug factories, fueling an explosion in synthetic drug production during the 2000s. In 2007, Mexican authorities raided his Mexico City mansion and uncovered what remains one of the largest cash seizures in history. More than $205 million stacked in boxes, safes, and cages, an amount so large that it took days to count. The discovery shocked the world and exposed the scale of profits hidden behind legitimate business fronts. Investigators later alleged that Yigan used shell companies, offshore accounts, and false documentation to disguise his operations, transforming the flow of precursors into a massive criminal enterprise. Yigan fought extradition for years, claiming political persecution and insisting his money came from legal trade. Yet his case revealed something much deeper, that in the modern drug economy, the lines between legal commerce and organized crime can blur completely. Number 3. Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez. Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, better known as El Mexicano, was one of the most feared and financially skilled members of the Medellin cartel. Unlike many of his counterparts, Gacha didn't rely solely on cocaine smuggling to build his wealth. He had an eye for diversification, investing heavily in Colombia's emerald mining industry, where money from the drug trade could be easily disguised as legitimate profits. To the outside world, he appeared to be a successful mining entrepreneur, but beneath that respectable facade was a man funding some of the most violent operations in Latin American history. By the mid-1980s, Gacha's empire had become a kingdom of its own. His ranches stretched across vast regions of Colombia, equipped with private airstrips, luxurious mansions, and heavily armed security forces. He surrounded himself with rare horses, expensive cars, and politicians who benefited from his influence. Yet behind that wealth was an obsession with control and power. Gacha wasn't content with merely trafficking cocaine. He wanted to dominate every part of the business chain, from production to export. His personal militias acted as private armies, enforcing his will with brutal precision and silencing anyone who dared oppose him. By the late 1980s, Gacha's power rivaled that of Pablo Escobar. He was even known to coordinate bombings in Bogotá and other major cities to intimidate the government. But as pressure from Colombian and US authorities intensified, his luxurious empire began to crumble. In December 1989, he was tracked down and killed during a massive military operation. A dramatic end to one of the most elusive figures in the cartel world. Number 2. Kobe Alexander. As the founder and CEO of Comverse Technology, an American telecom company once valued in the billions, Kobe Alexander built a legitimate business empire. But behind the polished corporate image, U.S. investigators later uncovered elaborate schemes involving securities fraud and offshore money movements, some of which intersected with laundering channels connected to organized crime and narcotics proceeds. When charges surfaced in 2006, Alexander fled the United States, eventually resurfacing in Namibia, where he lived in luxury for years. Protected by the country's slow extradition process and his status as a wealthy foreign investor, he managed to delay prosecution while continuing to live comfortably. His operations showed how the same systems used for global business, complex corporate shells, offshore accounts, and tax havens, could also serve as a perfect cover for concealing drug-linked funds and other illicit gains. Eventually, after years of negotiations, he agreed to extradition and pleaded guilty to securities fraud in the United States. Number 1. Dawood Ibrahim. At number 1 stands Dawood Ibrahim, the most elusive and powerful figure on this list, and perhaps the clearest example of how a criminal empire can evolve into a multinational enterprise. Born in Mumbai's crowded streets, Ibrahim started his rise in the 1970s, running small-time smuggling operations. Over time, he built an underground empire that came to be known as D Company, a vast network that spanned narcotics, arms trading, real estate, and legitimate businesses. His organization didn't just smuggle drugs, it moved money, influence, and political power across borders, blending the underground economy with mainstream commerce. By the 1990s, Dawood Ibrahim had become one of the world's most wanted men, accused of funding terrorist attacks, managing heroin routes from Afghanistan to Europe, and controlling a billion-dollar business empire across Dubai, Pakistan, and India. He owned luxury hotels, construction firms, and import-export companies, using them to launder profits that came from crime. What made him so dangerous was his invisibility. Every time authorities closed in, he seemed to vanish behind layers of frontmen, offshore holdings, and political protection. Despite international sanctions, Interpol red notices, and years of intelligence tracking, Ibrahim remains at large, often rumored to be living between Karachi and Dubai under heavy security. His estimated fortune runs into billions, spread across industries so integrated into legitimate markets that even experts struggle to distinguish clean money from criminal cash. Money from drugs does not disappear. It moves, transforms, and sometimes becomes indistinguishable from legitimate capital. The stories we've told remind us that wealth can be a force for construction or concealment, and that when it funds crime, trust becomes impossible. If you want more investigations into the hidden paths that turn crime into wealth, like this video and subscribe to The Fraud Files. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.